Hello, everybody, and welcome again to another episode of the Risk Matrix. We're back, baby. It's me, Dr. Martin, and James Junkin here with the Risk Matrix, coming to you from our new studio. Hi, James.
Man, I am super excited about this new studio. Let me get it out. Studio, new format, a little bit of a break to recharge. Just got back a couple weeks ago from ASSP 2025. Outstanding conference. Good to see you, Dr. Martin. It's been a minute.
Good to see you too, and thank you to Veriforce for continuing to power us here on the Risk Matrix and giving us the latitude to talk about things that mean something to us and mean something to you as we practice risk and safety compliance into the future. So, James, today we're going to talk about some of the proposed rollbacks to the OSHA standards. Can you give us a little context around that?
Yeah, OSHA here recently published an extensive list of standards that it wants to modify, change, or would totally withdraw. We're still in the comment period for public comment, but to me, it was a little bit surprising to see that many under consideration at one time. And I think this may mark a significant shift in at least this administration's approach to regulatory compliance and its regulatory philosophy. And it's really a continuation of some of the things that you've seen in other areas of the administration when it comes to regulation. A lot of deregulation, clawing back, and the impact of certain court decisions that has on the regulatory framework. So very interesting.
Cool. So we're not going to talk about them all today, but we're going to talk about a few of them that really kind of struck us and give us a little bit of stuff to talk about. I think some we agree on, some we don't agree on. But let's start with the respiratory protection and the rollback of medical surveillance for loose fitting air purifying respirators and powered air purifying respirators. Rollback of that standard, James. What say you?
Well, first of all, when we look at that rollback of that standard, we need to frame it in context. It's not removing medical evaluations for all respirators, right? I know some of that was initially reported that medical evaluations are going away. You won't have to do that. Right now, to date, if you wear a respirator, you must still have a medical evaluation, a fit test, and training. That is the law. And under the proposed standard, it's really a loosening in the medical evaluation related to N95 mask and PAPRs. And I remember back during COVID, this was a big thing. And I did some research prior to COVID, back when the silica standard was first being revised and coming out and updated, like 2014 sometime. And there's this huge debate as to whether or not an N95 was a respirator, and I remember safety professionals saying you can't fit test an N95. Well, you can fit test an N95. But what I found, and only safety nerds will think this is cool, is that there's a letter of interpretation in which Ed Falk, who is the former head of OSHA, under the George W. Bush administration, wrote a letter to Dr. Michaels, who was the head of OSHA under the Obama administration, seeking clarification on this issue. And OSHA does consider an N95 to be a respirator in the same sense as an elastomeric air purifying respirator with a protection factor of 10. And no one would argue whether those need to be fit tested or not. So it is a respirator under the standard. And then fast forward to where we got into COVID, right? And there was a lot of confusion in COVID times around N95s. Man, Dr. Martin, doesn't that seem like 1,000 years ago
like
now?
1,000 years ago. And I think, when you mentioned the COVID, and I'm glad you mentioned the silica standard too, because I think this potential repeal has everything to do with those particular standards, right? And let's just say that the temporary COVID standard is on the table too for repeal. But I believe that's where this is coming from.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm not going to say I'm opposed to it, but there was a lot of confusion around COVID because people that didn't normally wear N95s, if you will, or respirators with an APF of 10, all of a sudden were wearing this to protect themselves during the pandemic. And we can debate whether it was adequate protection or not some other time. But if you, as an employer, you required your employees to wear an N95 under the way the standards were interpreted prior to the pandemic, they had to have a medical evaluation, a fit test, and training. All right. And I think during that process, OSHA loosened the enforcement of the rule. They didn't change the rule, they loosened enforcement of the rule when it came to medical evaluation and fit testing. I seem to remember, you correct me if I'm wrong, but something being released by OSHA saying they weren't going to enforce that provision of the respiratory protection standard during the pandemic. So this is just a continuation of that, right? And, you know, when you look at the burden on a worker for wearing a PAPR or wearing a dust mask, I mean, you're the industrial hygienist here.
Loose fitting air purifying respirator, which I would say the only air purifying respirator that qualifies for loose fitting is the dust mask, is the N95, right?
So what do you think about the PAPR?
I mean, I guess if you're wearing a PAPR the correct way, right, there should be no burden. Well, I'm not going to say no. There should be a reduced burden on your ability to breathe properly and use that respirator without any medical distress. That's just my opinion. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a certified industrial hygienist, but in theory, I mean, where's the hazard, I guess, medically?
You know, I'm not going to say there's no risk. There's risk in anything, but it's relatively minimal risk, not non-existent risk. I mean, if you had certain cardiovascular conditions, maybe it could exacerbate it. But if you're in that type of situation for cardiovascular disease, are really fit enough to go to work to begin with, to where that type of barrier would send you into a medical emergency, I don't know. I don't have a real big problem with OSHA rolling this back. Now, my advice to safety professionals is you need to look at your policy and you need to stay in tune with what's happening here. This is a rollback on a specific use case, not a total rollback, right? But most of our policies and procedures are written to comply with the totality of the standard. So you need to make a management decision. And that management decision is going to be, do we just continue with the practice that we've had before? Right? We'll just send everybody for medical evaluations, regardless if it's a loose fitting PAPR or a N95. You can keep doing that. There's nothing that says that you can't. Or you're going to modify your policy and procedure if this is clawed back. It's not final yet, but if this becomes the final rule, you'll need to modify not only your practice, but your policies as well.
Well, and I think the other thing, James, I've heard you recommend to your clients and companies is that if it's in the policy and you say you're going to do it, then people are going to expect that you do it. So, you know, it's good advice to go back and revisit your policies, have them, whatever you're going to do, whether you're going to comply or over comply or whatever you decide to do, that your policy matches what you are doing, right? And that what you are doing matches what the current regulation is.
And this will have implications for people in pre-qualification systems. Or if you internally pre-qualify, you're going to need to make some modifications here from the standard protocols that you were using. So again, it's not a final rule yet. I don't know anybody that's out there beating the drum saying, hey, we're against this. No. You know, it's going to reduce cost and administrative burden on a lot of people. As a side note here, this is just James's opinion. okay? And this may not be a very popular one. But the way the medical evaluation is implemented anyway for these type of respirators and the broader respiratory protection all the way up to SCBA, supplied air, etc., is really not the way I think OSHA intended it to be when they wrote the respiratory protection standard. I feel like they meant for you to go to a doctor or a licensed healthcare professional, have an exam, and have them sign off. But really what's happened is a workaround the system, which is we fill out, the questionnaire in the appendix of the standard via some online forum. Some doctor that's never seen us looks at the questionnaire and says, all right, they're okay to wear a respirator. I mean, as long as you're not answering no to any of the questions on there, you're pretty much going to pass. So is it really a tool used to protect people, or is it just become a paperwork exercise and a mere formality?
I think in some cases it has, James, but I think in some cases it has not, right? For example, with the silica standard, it's very specific of what the medical evaluation needs to be for somebody wearing a respirator more than 30 days a year, right? I mean, you can't get a PFT test, pulmonary function test, online. You can't get a chest exam online, an x-ray, right? So,
Right.
so I think in some cases people are working around what was intended, which I think in the silica standard, they actually spelled it right out.
The silica standard is super detailed. I remember when that came out, we had classes, and I take the standard and actually put it up on the power, the screen. Back then we had screens. Back in the old days, 10 years ago, the old days, right? You had a projector. You had a projector screen. We put the standard up there, and we're highlighting this because that really moved beyond what you found in the respiratory protection standard, right? Questionnaire over here, and for folks that were implementing control measures and medical surveillance under the standard, man, you're talking about actually going to the doctor, a chest x-ray, a pulmonary function test, and any other test that the licensed healthcare professional deemed necessary. Now, that's what's in the standard. I don't know how many people are actually doing that in the assessments I do. It's rare. And they say we're using table 1 or table 2 and wet methods and these things. But medical surveillance has always been a challenge, even with like lead. Lead, you're supposed to blood in, blood out, right? How many people are actually doing that?
Very few.
Very few. Very few. And ultimately, in those high risk exposures like silica, asbestos, lead, they're there for a reason, because you can develop a very chronic, debilitating illness, especially silicosis, very much akin to the way it affects the body as asbestosis. Now, what I've always mesothelioma found is people are terrified of asbestos, but they give silica not even a second thought, right? They'll work in a dust cloud of silica that you can't even see your hand in front of your face. But if you called silica asbestos, they'd run from there in terror, right? So just look out for some of these changes in the respiratory protection standard, because there's a lot coming from, it looks like, deregulation from this administration. And I think kind of transitioning here, one of the next ones I was a little bit surprised about, and you work more in the construction industry than I do, but it's this construction illumination standard. Let's dig into that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Here's what strikes me about that. I read somewhere that, it was talking about taking this illumination standard out of the construction regulations, just striking it. And the reason being that in most instances, if you're doing a hazard assessment on a construction site and lighting is a hazard, that it should be covered under, you should be mitigating the hazard, and if you're not, that they can call you out on the general duty clause.
We're going to get in that general duty clause discussion, but I went back and prepped for this and kind of looked at the standard, right? this is like, I think 1926-53, and the minimum candles is very low. It's like 5 or something. This is not meant, I think, in the repeal of this standard to say all of a sudden, companies, you're allowed to
You don't
let
have
people roam around in the dark,
right. You don't
right?
have to do it. You don't have to put the lights under the staging, you know, for people walking by and whatnot. That's not what it's
But
saying. It's saying it could
that's
be
not what
covered
it's saying.
elsewhere.
It's going to be covered elsewhere, which kind of brings us to this point. And this is a philosophical discussion that has extreme ramifications to companies trying to follow the OSHA Act of 1970. And I think what you're seeing this administration do and what you're seeing the court do is the court is, in their cases outside occupational safety and health, to say, Congress, you need to do your job, right? You need to speak. You're the representative of the people. If you want a law, make a law. And the court in the administration now is looking to OSHA in a lot of these cases and saying, if you want a standard, make a standard. But the general duty clause is not a catch-all for everything that the compliance officer thinks you should be doing. Okay?
I don't think you can have it both ways, right? I feel like if there is a standard, why repeal it, right? It gives guidance to what exactly is required, as opposed to leaving it open to a general duty clause violation where we can just guess, right? And if anything, they're going to rely on what was used to be the standard, right?
Absolutely. I think it refers to an ANSI standard too. I'm not certain as the default. I'm not pro repeal this standard. I think it gives some guidance, but in actuality, how many people are cited is definitely not in the OSHA top 10 for violations of failure to provide proper illumination on the job site. Now, again, is it a situation? Yes, you and I have had some experience here recently where illumination was an issue and a contributing factor to someone's death, right? So it's not a non-issue. Lighting is a critical safety factor in construction activities, and poor illumination can lead to slips, trips, and falls from any type of height, is one of the top OSHA citations because it's the leading cause of death in the construction industry. You might see different cost-cutting measures. But I'll say this, the companies that have that attitude weren't providing lighting just because 1926-53 said you had to. I just don't see there's going to be this immediate uproar of people turning their construction sites dark because of OSHA repealing this. Those that are dark today, and they'll be dark 6 months from now.
Next week.
Right?
Yep. Exactly.
But it's really interesting because this is part of a broader deregulation philosophy. If you go back to the early days of this time of the Trump administration and all the executive orders that have come out, and I wrote this down, Executive Order 14192 is entitled Unleashing Prosperity Through Deregulation. And I find this pretty interesting as a safety nerd that all of these repeals for OSHA are being put through even before OSHA has a confirmed director. Okay? So I don't know if that's by design. It's very interesting how all that plays out, from the executive order. But here's what the executive order said. It said that you have to repeal 10 existing regulations in order to introduce a new one. So maybe what we're seeing here is OSHA shifting away from maybe prescriptive rulemaking and toward a more flexible industry-driven approach with compliance. But that's exactly the opposite of where the court's heading, which is if you want to enforce something, have a rule. And I think that's sort of what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So let's move on. We don't want to beat that to death. Let's move on to the big one here. And I'm going to let you introduce this one, James. This is the showstopper.
All right. The general duty clause, which states, see if I can quote it, each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees. And I apologize, this was written in 1970. It hadn't been modified, but his is a catch-all, his, her employees, right? No disrespect intended there, and I don't think they meant it back in the day. But historically, this has been taught amongst the safety professionals as sort of a catch-all when it comes to recognized hazards where OSHA does not speak. I'll give you one that's very confusing to me, and we see it all the time. If you would think about regulations being entirely written to protect workers and workplace safety, why is 4 feet the fall protection limit in general industry, but 6 feet in construction? When more people die from falls in construction, you think it'd be reversed, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Right.
A lot of industries are exempt from certain regulations. For example, a lot of people may be shocked to realize that the oil and gas industry, the upstream oil and gas industry, is exempt from OSHA's lockout tagout standard.
Right.
Even though there's not an operator, hiring client, oil company out there will let you go to work for them if you don't have a lockout tagout program, policy, training, and practice in place. So, I don't know, this general duty clause seems to be a way to enforce regulations that are either exempted or not specific enough across certain industries.
Let's speak a little bit about what the kicker is here, because they're not saying not using the general duty clause for anything. They're saying for specific things.
All right. So let's go back. We got to go back in time. 2014. Down in SeaWorld, down in Florida, a trainer working with a whale.
Killer whale.
Was killed. Killer whale was killed. Okay. OSHA came and cited SeaWorld under the general duty clause for failure to protect the trainer from the killer whale. And this worked its way through the court system. And once it got to the Court of Appeals, believe it or not, the Court of Appeals upheld the citation. But Judge Kavanaugh at the time, not yet Justice Kavanaugh, Judge Kavanaugh, he basically argued that in some activities there are inherent risks, like in entertainment, sports, for example, in which the intent of the OSHA Act was not to eliminate all risk in activities like skiing or football, or in this situation,
working with killer whales.
At SeaWorld, working with killer whales, right? It's sort of like citing a skydiving company for failure to provide fall protection. Now, his was a dissenting opinion, but in his opinion, now he's Justice Kavanaugh, but when he was a judge, his opinion was that the general duty clause should not apply to industries in which there are inherent risks, in certain professions in which there are inherent risk, like entertainment and sports. And he questioned whether OSHA has a job to protect people from themselves.
Right.
People know if you're going to be a killer whale trainer, right? You know that getting in the pool with a killer whale, I mean, hell, it's named killer whale, right? It's in the name that you're assuming some type of risk. So, anyway, his opinion was a dissenting one. I mean, the court sided with OSHA. Interestingly enough, now Justice Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, OSHA has decided to embrace Judge Kavanaugh's logic. And they're going to propose to exclude from enforcement those hazards that are deemed inherent and inseparable from the nature of certain professions. Okay? And that's going to significantly limit the scope of the general duty clause.
If it's going to significantly limit the scope of the general duty clause, I think it's going to put the general duty clause to work where it was intended to work, right?
Oh, I'm going to disagree. Because here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen. Where OSHA does not speak with a specific standard, the defense is going to be this right here. You cannot apply the general duty clause, and they're going to say that the risk that whatever person took was inherent and inseparable from the job activity.
I think there's going to be a lot more litigation and whatnot, but I think that the general duties clause is still going to be applied by compliance officers. And I think what's going to happen is we're going
to won't even touch it.
I think it's going to clog up a lot of things because people are going to try to apply it. Some of it's going to stick and some of it's not.
So who gets to decide? Who gets to decide what risks are inherent? Okay? And all this is headed to a courtroom for somebody to decide what risks are inherent. I'm just telling you what the defense is going to be.
Case law is going to start to decide, and the review commission is going to decide.
So you're seeing long-standing precedents coming under challenge and scrutiny, right? And this goes back to what we said earlier. The intent is for OSHA to speak with regulation. In my example, like previously with lockout, tagout in the oil and gas industry, there's nobody out there that's going to seriously say that lockout, tagout is bad.
Well, right. You're looking at the reasonable person, right? And I highly doubt that there's not going to be any application to the general duty clause and we're going to have to just figure it out, right? But I don't think a reasonable person is going to look at some of the cases that you're thinking are going to come up. And
who is a reasonable person?
Well, okay. We can argue the finer points of the law.
I'll
right?
tell you who a reasonable person is. It's going to be 12 people sitting on the jury. That's who's going to be the reasonable people deciding some of this. When it goes from that over to when it leaves the realm of OSHA and gets in wrongful death and gross negligence claims, right? So just because OSHA cannot cite you doesn't mean that you can't be held liable for it. But the repealing of this could create blind spots in high-risk industries.
Okay, so there you go, high-risk industries.
Okay, but it goes back to what's inherent. When you say, he used the words inherent and inseparable.
But the repeal says high-risk industries, correct?
No.
It doesn't.
No. The repeal is, and they gave examples, right? Entertainment, agricultural, the gig economies, right? But the application isn't just to them. And these things have a way of snowballing, right? And being used to cite this particular case for justification in another case. For example, the Chevron decision. For years, that was case law. It's gone. Bye. Out of here. And there have been other cases that appeared before the Supreme Court, which were social cases that were settled case law that are now gone out of here in this effort to put it back to the regulators to speak. So I don't know, maybe this is too much to get into in this segment, but you still have a responsibility to protect your workers. Don't be looking for loopholes because OSHA may or may not be able to cite you under the general duty clause. But there'll be some industries that are impacted. So if you are if you're a killer whale trainer, you know, that may come back. But really,
I'm laughing.
case was
I'm laughing
decided,
at the absurdity of it, right? That is an
well,
inherent risk. As
what
mentioned,
happened? But what happened after that incident and after that court ruling is a lot of those industries pulled back from those activities. They quit doing it. And Justice Kavanaugh's position was it was never meant for OSHA to be your mom and dad. If you take and understand what the risks are in those certain activities, you undertake the risk, right? There are certain things that have more risk than others.
well, it'll be interesting
And
to see what the comments are that come back. I think there's going to be some pretty strong comments on both sides of this issue. So I can't wait to see what comes out of it. But
well, this is where industry needs to lead. This is where safety professionals need to get involved and speak, right? Because I think what you're seeing is a rebalancing of risk, regulation, and responsibility, right? Risk, regulation, and responsibility. So as you're seeing some of these regulations start to be proposed to be rolled back, doesn't relieve you of your responsibility to protect your workers.
amen. Amen.
So still protect your workers, but be mindful that there's a lot of changes that come, and a lot of us are used to a lot of notification, a lot of discussion, because it's really surrounding one issue or whatever. I think, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's like 17 different regulations that are in consideration for modification or rollback
And I
right now.
think there's more to come, James. I think there's more to come. And I for our listeners, one of the things that I would recommend is to keep your eyes on what's coming in the headlines, right? Because we pick up on these things. I spend some of my day on LinkedIn. Every once in a while, you see something come up from one of the research or former research branches about what's being legislated, what's being repealed, movements on both sides of issues. So you need to stay involved in watching these changes. And James and I will do our part. We'll try to bring it up here on the risk matrix. But James, I think we could move forward today with saying we've kind of beat that one a little bit to death. I think we should keep our eyes on it because I think that it's going to morph, it's going to change, and there's going to be some really scathing comments.
This is going to get, once people figure out what and dig into it, once people start digging into it, there's going to be a lot of debate on both sides of this issue. And if you're facing an inspection by the regulatory body, which can levy penalties and citations that can then be used as far as consideration for awarding future work down the road, this can be intimidating, right? As to what it is we're supposed to do. But without trying to become a constitutional lawyer or become someone who practices occupational safety and law, you never go wrong doing the right thing.
That's right.
So in your words, exercise some reasonable due care in protection of your workers. And let's see how all this sorts out.
Amen. So thanks again, everybody, for watching and listening to the Risk Matrix. We rely upon you to give us a boost with your friends and colleagues and get your friends and colleagues to listen. As James likes to say, get your mama and get your mama to listen to the Risk Matrix. She wants you to listen to the Risk Matrix. You can find us on anywhere that you have, you can get your downloads of podcasts. You can see us on YouTube through Veriforce's YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe, make comments on there. James and I will chime back in, and connect with us on LinkedIn, because we'd like to hear what you want us to talk about. So James,
Absolutely.
you want to take us out?
Absolutely. Hey, thank you for everybody enduring our break. Got a lot of messages. Where's the risk matrix? Hey, we hadn't gone anywhere, baby. We just took a break for a few weeks to reset. We've got an amazing new producer, Miss Amanda. It's in the background that's helping put together all this new technology that we have. We appreciate her. Pass the word. Let everybody know we're back. Expect our weekly podcast. And look, if you want to get involved in the rulemaking process, you're super passionate. Just remember, the public comment period for this is open from now until September 2nd. So you got some time, but the clock is ticking. So if you really enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends, share it with your neighbors, share it with your mom. Your mom wants you to do that. Share it with a colleague. And until next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe from high hazard jobs, and Roll Tide, baby. It's back. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Out.